Hello and welcome along to Sporting Lives with Jonathan Doidge, the podcast that gets us closer to the action with sporting professionals. Today, I'm delighted to welcome a man with a great story to tell, or in fact, loads of great stories to tell, after a career in rugby league that took him to international level, took him to Australia, and won him every domestic honour that was possible to win. Loads of highs, also a few lows for him to tell us about as well, and some controversial stories. I'm sure that you'll agree Richard Mathers is a great guest for us to have on Sporting Lives. Now, Richard, it always seems a bit trite when we start these things to say, hi, how are you? But things have not been great for you in the last couple of months. We had to postpone this podcast, of course, in the first place. We've had to wait a couple of months to get you in because of a pretty horrific accident. Tell us more.
Firstly, thank you for the very kind introduction. Yes, I had an accident where I got hit off my bike by a car 9 weeks ago now. So I'm training for an Ironman in September. So I sort of planned my route to get up and get out on the bike early at 5:30 9 weeks ago, and I was on a roundabout, coming on a roundabout past the junction. Car didn't stop and hit me clean off the car. Clean off the bike. Very, very lucky. Sort of hit behind the saddle and took the back wheel off. But then subsequently suffered what's been diagnosed as significant brain trauma and concussion. So it's been a rough few weeks, mate, but I'm on the mend, and it's great to be here.
At risk of, and I certainly don't want to make fun of any of that, but you're sounding as clear as ever. Has that knocked a bit of sense into you?
Yeah, I think if you ask people who know me, it probably would knock a bit of sense into me, but. Yeah, it was a funny one. You just, as you say, kindly introduced my rugby career, but in all the time that I'd played, I'd never suffered what I'd consider a serious concussion or something that I'd just experienced. I had 15 rugby-related operations, but nothing as, I can genuinely say, nothing as serious as what I'd just been through. So I use the analogy of I'd genuinely rather broken my arm, because I know that you're in a pot for 6 weeks, and you know what you're batting with, but with your brain and the concussion, and you're blind to it really. So yeah, I was really well looked after by the NHS and the neurology department there. But it was the unknown, Jonathan, that was the scary part, and it was reliving the what could have been. That was that was also a bit of a challenge. But 9 weeks on, you were very kind to keep in touch and keep checking in across that time. But as every week's gone on, I think I've definitely improved.
Very, very serious stuff, and I know I did make a little bit of a joke about it, but you know that. That was genuinely a little bit of fun, and I was genuinely in touch with you across all that. Yeah. Not because of this, but because you just think, I would hate something like that to happen to me or somebody close to me, and it sounded horrific. So, when you called me that day when we were about to record this first time and said, I'm just reversing into a parking space at LGI.
Yeah, going for CT scans, and
I was kind of at the other end of the phone with the jaw having dropped. So great that you're here with us in one piece, apparently.
Yes.
And we can now look back on some great times and some tough times as well, as I've said. So let's start at the beginning if we can. We don't want to do this particularly chronologically. Let's jump about if we can as things occur to us. But it's a great way to start in terms of your rugby playing interest and your general sporting interest. So you were born in East End Park.
Yep.
Just a mile and a half or so up the road from this centre of Leeds that we're recording this. And you got interested in rugby league clearly at a very early age. You want to take us just through those formative steps with the Milford Marlins and with East End Park?
Yeah,
East Leeds?
Yeah. So growing up in East End Park, it was kind of the main sport, if you like. The East Leeds club was founded in sort of 1979 and was very much the heart of the community. anyone who knows Eastern Park, I'm an Eastern Park lad. It's it's not the nicest area in the world, and you sort of could have chose to go down one path or another. And a lot of my friends, and my dad played rugby as well for the U Tree and some of the older pubs, and just got encouraged to go down at 8 years old, and just fell in love with it. Went down, and Dan, it's produced some great players in Danny Maguire, Leroy Rivet, to name just a couple. And it was just one of those things where it was you'd train sort of Tuesday, Thursday, play on a Saturday, and just fell in love with the game straight away. I think the camaraderie and I guess the structure, giving you something to look forward to of a week, because as I say, it wasn't the easiest place to grow up. You could easily find yourself into trouble. So it started at 8 and then played all the way through up until about 14. It was when I went to Milford. And the only reason why I went, and Milford was a great club. We had a fantastic side. But at East Leeds at the time, at the under-14s, they didn't have an under-15s. And they wanted us to start playing like 18s, 17s, 18s, and which is far too much of a jump at that age. So I had some friends who played for Milford, and my dad was friends with their coach. And then they were like the standout side. They had Dwayne Barker, Dean Ripley, Ryan Bailey, Jermaine Ray. We were a real superstar side. And some great tales of Milford. We actually played. We were that good. We played Lancashire schoolboys. Offered, our coach offered us to play against Lancashire schoolboys at Headingley as a bit of a test, and it probably wouldn't happen now, but as a bit of an exhibition game, and we just wiped the floor with them. And then sort of from there, from an early age, you kind of knew that was a path that I'd like to take. You had a bit of success early doors from a playing point of view, and it's very different now then to now in terms of, there was a lot of scouts around watching and chatting to mums and dads, and from a very early age, I realised it was probably a career for me.
If it's what you want to do, that's one thing, and if you've got the talent, that's another thing. There's a lot of debate, isn't there, in sport about how much the makeup of a professional or a great player is in terms of skill and work ethic. When you're winning trophies and you're beating teams like Lancashire with a so-called all-star side from Leeds, and you want to take that next step up, there's going to be some people who want it to be easy all the time, who never quite get there because they think it's always going to be easy and they're not up for the challenge. So how did that translate for you when you were making that step up then, when you got the offers from the Leedses and the Wigans and the Warringtons, I think it was?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. And I'm a firm believer is, talent only takes you so far, and I don't mean it to sound in a corny or a soundbite, where I was very self-aware that, talent only took you so far. Like, I was a real student of the game, so I'd pester my dad to record games and take me to Headingley, and I'd never watch a game. I'd just watch fullbacks or standoffs, but I always knew that for every one of me there'd be another 5 or 6 fighting for your spot, and you're quite right. Out of that Milford side, there were probably only 3 or 4 of us that made it. So yeah, it was having that self-awareness of, and at an early age, I think rugby league is it matures you quite quickly in terms of your lifestyle choices and the decisions that you make. And I sort of made that, and sort of had that emotional intelligence, if you like, very early doors, that if you want to, I knew I was talented. I wasn't the biggest, strongest, fastest, but I knew I had something, because Wigan, Leeds, Warrington, all came in for me at 13 years old and offered some say, I'm happy to talk about it if you like, but and that's where was some crazy money back then. But then that's when it sort of started being serious. So Leeds at the time always signed the best kids because it were Leeds and they had the reputation, as I do now, everybody. It was more of a privilege that Leeds wanted to sign you. But then Wigan made a massive fuss. Eric Hawley, who signed Jason Robinson, great, lovely gentleman. He took myself, my mum and my dad over to watch Wigan and St Helens on Boxing Day at the old Central Park. We sat in the boardroom with Maurice Lindsay, and then on the way out, he said, right, took us to the club shop. He said, take anything you want. So like my dad got like subs jacket and like training gear and stuff. And then I actually signed for Warrington. So Warrington, I always went a little bit against the grain, and I think that we'll get onto that throughout my career. I always was a little bit different. I always wanted to try something. I thought, well, everyone's signing for Leeds, and so I used to go over to Warrington. My dad, looking back now, my dad used to drive me over twice a week, but I trained with the first team. Whereas with Leeds, you had to earn your stripes and stuff, but they thought that much of me. I remember kicking with Frano Botica and Lee Breers at the time, and Alex Murphy was really interested, and they offered us an absolute fortune at 13 years old, and I'm happy to share it with you. So to get the deal done, there's the head scout called Jim Reeder said to me, Dad, I want to meet you at Birch Services, and because they knew it was sort of decision time. So we met at Birch Services, and we had a coffee, and he passed me Dad like an envelope. So I'm 13, I didn't think anything of it, or Burger King, or we had a McDonald's or whatever. Got back in the car, and there were £5,000 in this brown envelope, just as a sweetener to sign. So I was like, well, I said, well, how much can I have for that? Somebody had given me £100. He said, you can buy yourself a pair of Rockports, and and he said, I'll save the rest for when for a house, or for whenever you're ready for when you're 18. But then they put an offer on the table of a 4-year contract at 13, £60,000 a year, and a 10,000 sign-on bonus. And I've still got the contract upstairs, and it's mind-boggling to think, knowing what lads get paid now and what I got paid relatively, but it was never sustainable. So that lasted sort of 6 months, and to be fair, I got paid accordingly. But then they weren't the Warrington as they are now in terms of like Simon Moran and the Wilderspool, and they nearly got they were in financial strife, and the chief executive, a chap called Peter Smith at the time, asked for a meeting with my dad. I wasn't present, and said, look, he's on more money than most of a lot of our first team players at 13, and we can't play until he's 17. Can we come to some financial agreement, because it's going to send we're going to have to cut these large contracts down. So my dad sorted that out, and I became a free agent then. So that had been sort of 14, 15, and then the sort of circus started again, if you like. And I was like, Dad, I just don't want to, I don't want to go to Wigan. I don't want to, have to go through it all again. I just want to enjoy my rugby again. So I didn't start. So we went on tour with England Academy. England Schoolboys. I went on 2 tours. I went on an England Schoolboys and an England Academy, and I was the only player not to sign have signed for a professional club. So went out to Australia. It was fantastic, absolutely fantastic tour, and Brisbane Broncos were interested. My dad was telling the tale. I had a couple of beers with my dad on Sunday, and my dad he loves a tale. My dad and the head scout for Brisbane Broncos was interested, but it didn't work out. And then I came back, and then decided to sign for Leeds, and so the rest is history. But it was funny because, like, if you look at the regulations and it's right in this day and age in terms of scholarships and manipulating young players, and it wasn't like that. It was like the Wild Wild West back then. Right. But yeah, that's how I sort of got into the professional ranks.
And am I right in thinking that when you started as a junior, you were playing at standoff alongside a bloke who became quite a good one.
Yeah, well, it's his bloody fault why I ended up playing fullback. So Danny Maguire, who you're talking about, I'll name him. So Danny's a year older than me, but I always played a year above. So I always played with Danny, Rob, Chev, and it came to Leeds trials, Yorkshire trials, and I was looking. So you had to, back in them days, you had to put your preferred position and a second position. So I'm thinking, well, cause when I played my own age group, I played standoff. But then when I played above, I was like, well, I ain't going to play standoff in front of him. So I just put fullback because I looked at the sheet and I thought, well, I did a bit of totting up, so there were maybe 6 wingers, 5 centres, and I thought, well, there's only another fullback, so I put fullback, and then we played like an A and a B team, and then I played a fullback ever since. So it did me a favour. So I've managed to get a career.
So direct competition with your best pal. What was it like in those early years at Leeds? I mean, as somebody who's watched the club since the 70s, so I think anybody who knows rugby league and has heard me do a commentary or seen a written report would know that I'm a rugby league fan per se, but my club would be Leeds. I was a season ticket holder back in the day. I watched the John Holmeses. My own on-field rugby league hero was Gary Schofield, and all the history of all that time, the trophies under the Holmes era with all the lads who did what they did, different era, different game. That sort of transition period into the 90s in towards Super League where Leeds had the Scoies, they signed some big name players. You can think of loads of those. Ellery obviously been the major case in point towards the back end of that. But they still were winning little or nothing. And then we get this transition into the early part of Super League, first couple of years out of the way, which is not the best. Graham Murray comes in, and then of course Darryl Powell, Tony Smith.
Yes.
There's a transition in terms of, well, I think probably Dougie Lawton may have started that with the lads that he put on the books back in his day in the early 90s.
Yeah.
But a decade later, there's yourself, there's Chev, there's Danny, there's Rob, several other, Kevin Sinfield, obviously.
Yeah, Jamie Jones.
So you've got a group of young lads. There's been a group of young lads around the club for several years before. What changed at the club, do you think, from what your experiences have been and from people you've spoken to before, to launch that so-called golden generation? Yeah,
and it's a really good question, and I can answer it. I think because we'd all played, for sort of Leeds schoolboys, Yorkshire, we dominated all Yorkshire selections, all England selections, and it sounds sort of cheesy, but we're all best pals, so we'd all sort of grown up together. We all knew how we all played, but what I will say is, before we all got in the first team, the academy had won 9 grand finals straight, so there was an expectation that you had to win. It was just, you walked into Leeds Rhinos and you had to win, and that was led by, first of all, Kevin Sinfield and Jamie Jones, and then Dave Wrench and Danny Ward, and then it was passed down, and then it was like once it was your turn and your year, there was no negotiation. You had to win it. But what drove that was, while we were all best mates, we were all ultra competitive, and we all wanted one. It was our club. We're all from Leeds. We're all from similar backgrounds, but we all knew. I think there's a couple of defining moments where we all sort of looked at each other, that cluster of thinking, where the next conveyor belt. So what they used to do was they used to play the first team against the academy. So the old guard of Dean Lawford, Ryan Sheridan, so on and so forth, Cal Pratt, Andy Hay, and then they'd just stick R13 against their best 13, and we used to just tear them apart. And we'd genuinely just tear them apart. And we all sort of thought, well, hang on a minute, we've got a chance. And they used to wait us, them old boys, because they knew we were ready to take their spots. I remember once we'd literally, I think they'd called the game off because it got that bad in terms of embarrassing. And Ryan Sheridan kicked Danny Maguire full on in the face out of frustration. Because obviously he was after his spot and they'd scuffle for a ball, and he kicked him full on, and then we'd all run in, like we're only babies, but it was like a changing of the guard, and it was a bit old school back then, where they had the first team changing rooms, and you weren't allowed in the first team changing rooms unless you'd played for the first team. But we were all like a band of brothers. We were like, well, sod them, we'll just get changed in the rubbish change rooms because we're gonna take their places anyway. So it was like, it's easy to look back. We didn't consciously think at the time, but there was that belief that I can sit back now at 37 and reflect. But then underpinning all that, we had great academy coaches: Stuart Wilkinson, Darryl Powell before he got the head coach's job, Mick Cook, Steve Walsh, who was a conditioner, put hours and hours and hours. They used to run us like dogs around the hills, and the mental resilience and building that.
It sounds like a sort of montage from Rocky. This in the build up to the big fight, or in your case, the big career.
Yeah.
So if we run that on then, and I did say we'll try and avoid total chronology, but let's think about the start of the professional career, because you're at Leeds, but then ironically you go on loan to Warrington, where you make your first senior appearance.
Yeah.
You're back at Headingley, and you make your debut against Saints in a game that you lose on the wing, replacing Cal Pratt.
Yeah.
And you played 4 matches for the Rhinos that season wearing the number 30 shirt on the wing. It feels a bit different to Warrington because you're at a big club, Leeds, and people are probably thinking, "Oh, there's that young Mallers on the wing. Yeah, I did all right tonight." That's the sort of comment that you're probably going to get. What I want to know really about that first period, and you can give us your thoughts on your debut if you like, but it's more about the attitude at the club. When I'm saying what changed, there were lots of moans I seem to remember around and about on the quiet, people talking behind their hands about those senior players and some attitude issues. Now you're here to tell us straight. What was the case?
Yeah, I think, so that was 2002. And it was very much that the old guard knew they were on the way out, and they didn't like these young, brash, confident, backed by the club, because we weren't. It wasn't just one of 2 talented players. It was 8, 9, 10, and it was that generation were probably bitter and twisted that they knew they were going out or getting pushed out, by the exception of Francis Cummins, who put his arm around us all and were fantastic. But my memories of them 4 games for Leeds and number 30 playing on the wing outside Key Senior, which thankfully, because it was massive, I knew I'd be looked after. But my sort of memories are not, I was really proud to make my debut, really proud to play at Headingley in front of where I'd always wanted to play for. But there were no real camaraderie, and, it was all very much, like you say, looking after number 1 and how much can I get and if I'm going to get paid out. And it wasn't until we'd all got through together, and then, so they'd be like, Rob and Danny would get through, and then Chev, and then Mark Calderwood, and then Jamie Jones and Kev were always brilliant anyway. But it wasn't until then we started overtaking them in numbers that it sort of became our way. But yeah, you're right. It was sort of from 2000 to 2002. I'd argue strongly it was toxic, and the results probably reflected that. And what I will say is, I've gone on record before, what unbelievable foresight and balls by Gary Everington and Darryl Powell to get rid of what were perceived as deadwood and expensive deadwood to give us all a chance, because it could have gone one way or the other, but they really believed in this crop of young players, and that they knew that there might be a little bit of heartache and some results might not go the way they want straight away, but the foresight and the nerves, because Leeds, you know, as you said, it's not a small club. It's the expectation is to win. You know, there's 20,000 fans there. It's a massive club, always has been. To have the goal to get rid of some established internationals and give, you know, number 30 a go and number 29 a go, with a view that it is going to be a bumpy road. You know, you can't underestimate the magnitude of Darrell's and Gary Everington's foresight. And
you look at those players who went at the time, and there's a sort of juxtaposition of opinion, of derision. They're never going to win it. As Alan Hansen famously said about whatever it was, Man U all those years ago, never win anything with a bunch of kids. And then there's the other people who say, no, they've got to go because they're not winning trophies because of these people. So the kids can't do any worse, was the type of attitude. Yeah. So you were probably in one camp or the other as a Leeds fan at the time. And then you roll it on to 2003, and suddenly we start to see this come to fruition. Doesn't quite happen for Darrell Powell. Finished second in Super League that year. I think Gary Connolly's joined the club. Yeah. By then he's playing at
Lance Todd at Cardiff.
Yeah. Playing full back. I mean, talk to us about Gary Connolly playing full back, because you're there waiting in the wings for that opportunity.
I was fuming. But what I will say is what an absolute gentleman he was. So I'd got the taste in 2002. Ben Walker had signed on massive money. The best trainer you've ever seen, couldn't play. Lovely guy, but timid as a cat. Franny were coming towards the back end of his career. So I'd had a little taste on the wing. So I'm thinking, you know, 2003, I could have my shot here. Then they signed Gary Connolly. I'm like, either they don't rate me. But again, it was done with me in mind. The need, not just me, but with the team in mind, but with my development in mind. And it was invaluable, that 2003 season. Just been around him. I was in awe of him. You know, I've been to Wembley to watch him play for Great Britain. And he was at a stage of his career where he'd achieved everything he could have achieved. He wanted to still be successful, but also he wasn't one of those old pros who he knew I was snapping his heels. Like, I trained 100 miles an hour. I was enthusiastic. You know, he was. This is a famous story. So at Kirkstall, when it was cold, or the main pitch, which we call Wembley, we'd have to go and train over at Abbey Field. So we'd all get together and we'd all have to jog over together. Not Gary, he used to get in his Cherokee, gloves on, and drive and park at the back of the sticks and train, which Tony, it didn't last long with Tony. But in terms of influence, he spent as much time, I just shadowed him, but equally off the field as well. So we had some good nights out. You know, his nickname was Lager, Gary Lager. So it's, you know, but just all round really, in terms of development. And yeah, it was brilliant. And then obviously at the end of that season, Darrell left, and I think it's tough on Darrell because we finished second. We played some great rugby. We got beat in the Challenge Cup final. But the problem,
should he or shouldn't he?
Got sacked.
No.
Or
take the two. I'm going to ask everybody who comes in that one, who was in that final. Yeah. I think I asked Franny already.
Yes.
Let's carry on.
Yes. I didn't play, so I can say yes, I thought I should have done. But with Darrell, I think, going back to the old generation, if you like, he'd played with too many of them to have. So he had us all gooey-eyed and do whatever he wanted. But I think there was a realisation that to take us that group to the next step, They had to be changed. We were all gutted because I still think the world of Darrell gave me my debut, and he was a great coach. But I think there were too many of the old guard who'd played with him where that professional and a bit of blurred lines. So the club made the decision to sign Tony Smith.
So it maybe needed that disciplinarian that we're always told Tony is to come in and change it. Just before we talk, Tony, so you say you think Kev should have taken that kick. Was that mentioned in the dressing room after? What was?
I wasn't
like?
there. No, I didn't go.
You didn't even go.
No, I did travel, but I wasn't with a team. So I just I think I was on the academy bus. But what do you think? Do you think you should have took the two?
I've probably never really felt too strongly about it either way, because if he scores a try,
yeah,
so
ifs and buts, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But it's the question that's always asked, isn't it? So Tony comes in, and obviously, I know you're still great pals with the man now. What a job he did for the club, and he just took that group of players who were starting to make their way and moulded into something very special. Yeah, and I think you'll have spoken to both Tony and enough people over your time, Jonathan, to realise the impact he had on the club. But just to be fair, when it first got announced, we were all going to Flamingo and we were doing a fan day, and we always used to, all the first team would go, and the junior members would go to Flamingo Land, and it got announced, or we got told on the bus. I'm like, who's Tony Smith? Never, who's Tony? He coached at Huddersfield, so a bit pessimistic. But he came in, and we were good players, talented, but he came in and taught us things that you just had not even thought about, how to catch a ball, which sounds ridiculous. How to have your feet a certain way, and to summarise it without going through each bit, minute detail of every single play, marker play, kick pressure to the point of, where your feet need to be at what point. And do these little? Did you see this work on the field? Do these little margins work?
Yeah, 100%. And we all thought he was a bit of a mad scientist at the start, and he's got a funny aura. We're all scared to death of him, absolutely scared to death of him. I still get nervous if my phone rings now, and I still get nervous now. But he had an innate ability to hold a room, but also he could say something to me and he knew what made my buttons tick, or he'd say something to you completely different, but he knew it was a very, very intelligent man in terms of the psychological side of it. But he brought things in like yoga, like catching tennis balls, hand-eye coordination, like stuff like you just assume we're bonkers. But it grew a belief, because we could see we were getting bigger, stronger, faster, more skillful. And the way he wanted us to play, and the style he wanted us to play suited what we had. We were big, strong, fast, fit, youthful. And he just said, just play, because he said he'd just blow teams away. And we just all jumped on board with it.
So he was more of a coaching some different stuff that helped add little extra bits to your game, but not a hard and fast game plan type coach.
Yeah.
More about trusting in your skills. If you've done everything you can in training, I trust you guys as a 17 to go out there on the field and play it as you see it.
Two things were, if you see it, play it. If you see it and you mess up, you defend that next set. You get that ball back. But I trust you to. So in this day and age, and I don't like to sit here as an ex-pro back in my day, but it's very, very structured in terms of, there's lead runners and this, that and other. We were blessed. We had, on the left-hand side, Danny Maguire, Ali Lawatiti, Keith Senior, Franny Cummins. On the right-hand side, you had Chev Walker, Dave Fern, and Mark Calderwood. Just give them the ball and follow them. Matt Diskin at dummy half. I'll throw myself in there running round. But he trusted us, yes, but he taught us a fundamental skills which are overlooked really in terms of like catching the ball off your chest, because if you catch a ball on your chest, you can't pass it as quick, which sounds absolutely basic. but it just revolutionised how we played, encouraging us to offload. So we practice being in awkward positions, but we'd be only allowed to hold the ball in one hand. You know, I'll allow a TT and offload. And if you think back of some of the rugby we played in 04 and 05, I don't think it's been played since like that. And the other thing was, in terms of the defence, is absolute non-negotiable was if they make a break or they score a try, there has to be more Rhino shirts in the picture than theirs, and I can live with that. So if they make a break and there's only me chasing back and there's four of them, he used to go absolutely potty. And so, but then that built sort of the expectation, the pressure. And the other thing was, what he also brought in was no one was dispensable. So when his first year, Gary Connolly was first choice fullback. I didn't make my first appearance until round 2 when Gary got injured. So I'm sort of kicking my heels, like loving it, absolutely loving it, but thinking, Gary's got another year. I'm ready now. I'm ready. I've learnt loads. I'm fit. I'm strong. And then Gary got injured, unfortunately for him. And I remember Tony saying to me, walking out at Kirksley, he said, "You're playing this week," and he said, "The shirt's yours as long as you deserve it. So it's yours to keep as long as you deserve it." And I played every game ever since.
Good to his word. And I mean, you were saying it was absolutely fuming if there were less Leeds players in the picture than the opposition on those sort of occasions. I was going to say, what annoyed him, what got to him, what made him feel scary then?
Do you know what he wanted us to be? He wanted us to be good people. So manners, being on time, how he spoke to people, respectful. He used to lose his temper fairly rapidly. If you were late to meetings or you walked past a piece of rubbish that were left on the floor, it was like, they're not our standards. Or if you were rude, or if you didn't say please and thank you when you got your lunch, those things, it wasn't just a rugby league coach. He really turned us from boys into men, but good men and good people. I'd like to think, it turned us into good people. But that transferred onto the field, I think, because then your habits are, it was very much of how you live your day to day, how you live your life day to day translates onto the field, and it just gives us just this innate confidence. Genuinely, in them few years, and it may sound really flippant, this, I'd turn up to the games and I just knew we wouldn't get beat. Whereas, before and since, you sometimes turn up and think, it could be. We just knew we wouldn't get beat. And
it's a great feeling, and people watching and listening, I'm sure, whatever team you've played in, you'll identify with that if you've played in a successful team. I know even at amateur level, I felt like with some of the cricket teams I've played in, for example. You are, by the way, watching Sporting Lives with Jonathan Doidge, my special guest, Richard Mallers. And we're looking back on his great rugby league career, and, well, as you can see, some fantastic stories. You can get in touch, by the way, with suggestions for future guests on jonathandoidge@hotmail.com. Please do hit subscribe, whether you're watching this on YouTube or whether you are listening on Podbean or iTunes or Spotify or whatever forum it is you've chosen. And you can also follow me on @SportingLives1. Please do give the podcast a follow. It's followers and subscribers that make it count.
Yes, give it a follow.
So, back to 2004 in a moment, because before 2004, there's something pretty difficult happens in your life. You lose your mum over Christmas 2003, without wanting to drag up some pretty awful memories.
It's like Piers Morgan, you're going to get me to cry. No.
But Christmas Eve.
Yeah.
It's birthday, Boxing Day. You're only a 19-year-old lad. You're just setting out on this fantastic rugby league career. Yes, you've still got your dad. We all want our parents to be there, support us. Yeah. As a parent yourself now, you understand what it's like for the parents as well. So to lose your mum at that stage must have been absolutely crushing when she could have seen so much more of you.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, goes without saying, it was a really, really, really tough time. She got diagnosed with cancer at 43, and it was incurable. It was a sort of a tumour in between a lung and a heart, which was inoperable. She went through chemotherapy and, sort of saw the worst of, her pain. And yeah, she passed away Christmas Eve 2003. She was in St Gemma's on and off for a sort of 6 months, but then that sort of last 3 weeks up until Christmas, she was really, really, really poorly. And as you can imagine, we were sort of sat by a bed every day. And we'd just done the captain's run on the Christmas Eve morning. Obviously, have Christmas Day off, play boxing. Yeah, so with it being, I don't mean only a Boxing Day game, but it's not as important as a usual game. So it was only half an hour. And I remember coming off and said, "You better get up here ASAP." Managed to get there just in time to say my goodbyes. And yeah, she went peacefully at St Gemma's. But yeah, just heartbreaking at 19. It's sort of, on one side, people assume you've got it all, but on the other side, you've lost your mum, regardless of what age. But she was such a massive influence in my life, and looking back now, what she's probably, she missed me playing at Wembley and at all the big games. And then in a birthday on Boxing Day, which coincided with Leeds playing that day as well. And I played. So I was too upset to ring Tony. So my dad rang Tony and told him about my mum. And he said he wants to play. And Tony was like, no. And he said, no, he wants to play for his mum. I can't tell you anything about the game. Can't remember anything. Can't remember how. I think I got subbed, but I can't remember anything. But I played in her honour because I knew she'd have wanted me to do that. And as a kid, and it was a really, really big thing to get picked to play on Boxing Day. That you knew if you got picked to play on Boxing Day, you were in for a good shout that season. And I was like, well, she'd want me to play in that for her, but also she'd want me to play so I don't miss the opportunity that it might bring itself. But yeah, it was a tough time. But in a lot of ways, I guess it kind of forged my resilience as a person having to deal with death of my mum. My dad lived in Spain at the time, so I was effectively on my own from 19, and I had to do a lot of growing up very quickly.
How did that affect you? I mean, you're talking, as you say, Christmas season starts then February time, probably. Was it still something like that? It's still been March, I'm not sure, but not long anyway. And you're into a full season, which ends up being a brilliant season. Yeah. But I mean, was there any temptation for you to think, you know what, there's more to life than rugby league?
No, it saved me, Jonathan. I absolutely, I think if you asked anybody who knew me from day one to day I retired, I was always a great trainer anyway, but it was my saviour, going to Kirksall and training and playing and having that structure, like I was living in Eastern Park by myself. At 19 years old, it literally could have gone one way or another. And I just threw myself into my rugby. And ironically, I ended up being one of the best years professionally that the club, myself, had ever had. But it was probably a welcome distraction, and it was the only way I could deal with it. And I probably didn't really grieve properly because I threw myself into the rugby side of it for a good few years after.
Great stuff then from Richard Mathers in part 1. Please do click subscribe to receive parts 2 and 3 and all the rest of our Sporting Life podcasts for free. Parts 2 and 3, well, Richard tells us all about the glory years, of course, at Headingley with the Leeds Rhinos, his foray down under, and many other fantastic stories, including the inside on what happened at Castleford. So do stick with Sporting Lives for that. We'll be back with part 2 of Richard Mathers very soon.